I see that.
Yeah,
Is it updating?
Huh?
It's updating.
Yeah. And when you turn this on, it is updated.
Yes.
And then I won't eat it.
Yeah.
What?
Okay, listen. Mommy's doing a video really fast, okay?
Mommy, what?
Yes. I know you've got to let it update, and then your music will come back. Okay. So I get a lot of requests for this. Not necessarily the leopard, but my glitter swirl, my take on the Milky Way. So I figured I would record this in steps for you guys. My 4-year-old doesn't allot me a ton of time to do a live video, so I don't think anybody wants to hear that screeching tantrum in the background when it happens. So please don't touch that. So I've sanded, prepped this cup as normal. I actually do not like to glitter with the arm on, but it's been sanded, spray painted to just give me a base. It doesn't have to follow this exact design. It rarely does. So close the door when you go out, okay? The glitters I'll be using are PDB Coachella, Nicole Moret's new Valentine's Day box, the Concept, the Blues, the Wicked, some Girl, and PDB Smitten. So I try to set my cups in front of my heater like this to get them warm, and then the epoxy just glides right on. I do prefer the epoxy method. I don't really have a preference whether I do it loosely on my table or on the turner. So just gonna put a little bit of this on here. I might have mixed barely 5 mLs. It really takes almost nothing. You do not want
Do you want to pay special attention to the rim, the bottom? This is a Still Magnolia 32 ounce plump. Okay, that's literally. I always make sure on these that I kind of stick my finger in that little groove, hoping that some glitter kind of gets in there. I love that Still Magnolia bottoms are flat.
I'm gonna start with the Concept first, and I'm gonna follow it down along this black line right here. And I do start pretty high up. I'm not trying to get a ton of coverage just yet until I start laying down all my colors, and then I kind of go back and fill in the spots. It's okay that it kind of dusts off. To me, that helps kind of ombre the edges so they're not as blunt. Maybe I should have kept the foam in for this purpose. I'm gonna
Gotta keep the towel holder.
This is just parchment paper. I buy it in bulk at Sam's Club because it's super cheap and I can reuse the same piece forever. Okay, and I'm just gonna set that aside. I'm not necessarily done with that color, but we'll come back to that. So now I'm gonna take the blues and I'm just gonna lightly dust it right on the other side of the concept here. And let me tell you, if you did not get a Valentine's Day box, boy oh boy, this is by far my favorite box so far. There isn't a single color in that box that I was not dying to use as soon as I got home with it. Okay. So like I said, there are still open spots, and we'll worry about filling those. I try to go dark light, not necessarily on all my cups, but it does give a little bit of contrast, especially when we get to the part 2 of this. So now I'm taking the Wicked here, same thing from pretty high up. Just gonna lightly sprinkle this into that purple strip. The bottom doesn't too much matter either. I'm sure you've seen a lot of Nicole's videos. I do the same thing. I just kind of throw some glitter on the bottom. Okay. Contaminate your good glitter. So now I'm taking some Girl, just putting it. And I did get a pretty big strip of purple, so I didn't completely take it over, which is fine, because Girl over a colored base, I don't know if any of you've experimented, it does amazing things on different base colors, so it will kind of also help fade out that high contrast between the purple and set on a ton of different base colors. So the last color I'm going to go in on here is Smitten from PDB. This is like my new favorite glitter from the last glitter pack. So I'm just gently shaking above the cup here. I'm not dumping on the cup by all means. Okay. Kind of just pick a few little streaks that I want to do, and I'll put like a lighter, just a little sprinkle. I do go a little heavier here because for the most part most of the epoxy has been hit, so I like to sprinkle it where there's a lot of dark color, and it just to me adds a little bit of glitter depth, so it's not all the same color. Coachella for me helps blend out the harsh lines from dark to light glitter, and I feel like every cup needs Coachella, so gotta put a little on there. I do like to throw Coachella on the bottom. I'm going to do a little bit of this on the bottom. I'm going to come and bring it just a little bit into that next color. I say this about all glitter being my favorite, but man, these new colors are like dying. So now I'm just going to go back in here with the blues.
Don't get it wet. They're not wet yet, but something's wrong. My dad's not even done uplifting.
Just be a little quiet. Squeaky chair. And I know it doesn't look like much now. They never do at this stage. They're always kind of like hodgepodgey, I guess. Just a little bit of girl right here. Put some of her on the bottom. And I do just kind of let a little bit of these color, well, girl will grab the color underneath it. So with glitters like that, I do kind of like sprinkle in a few different places over different colored bases just to give it a little bit of a different transition. For the most part, that's that. I'll let this sit for 4 hours. I live in Wyoming. I'm sure everybody knows that by now, but it's really cold here in the winter. It's negative 13 here the other day. So my house thermostat is set at 72 pretty much all the time. And I do keep this space heater running in here anytime I have cups. So it cures my epoxy pretty quick. And I'm just going to put all this back in here. So once that dries, I am going to do a flood coat of epoxy on that. And then I will video part 2 once that's done. I do have this other cup to do, but not all the glitters are PDB and NMO, so I will not be including that cup in these videos just because I did not cover my bottles. So yeah, that is that. I will take a gloved hand in a second. I will kind of pat down anything that's sticking up. But yeah, I I will just let that dry, and I will see you guys in a couple hours for part 2. Okay guys, so I'm gonna start part 2 of the Milky Marble, whatever you want to call it, cup. I am using about 4 to 5. 5 is pretty typical of me. I don't exceed more than 5 because then it gets to be a little busy in my opinion. I typically do 2 whites. Dreamcatcher is going to be perfect for this. I just got it, so I'm really excited to see that on a cup. And then some kind of white pigment with a shimmer. So I'm going to use peyote on this one, diamonds and pearls, white pearl and white gold are, and cake are some of my favorites. Vice is a good one. I'll show you why I like to have those together in just a second. I do pick a few coordinating colors in either darker or lighter hues. So if I have a dark purple, I am picking just a bit lighter. So for instance, on this one, I'm going to use Purple Haze by Nicole Moret. Peyote was also Nicole Moret. And then this pink is Watermelon from PDB Blinks and Glitter. And it's going to come out just a little bit lighter than Smitten on here. And then I am going to put some black on here, so I'm going to actually use Shook Raven for that.
Mom!
What, babe?
I love you.
I love you too. I'll be out in just a second, okay? So, she's going to be upset in a minute because I don't let her in here when I'm going to have epoxy going. So, it's very little, like maybe 2 little scoops from this at the most. I do have my epoxy over here on a little warmer, just to make it easier to mix. So I have, I do mix 2 per cup, about 3/4 of an ounce each. 3/4 of an ounce each. I do typically end up with quite a bit of residual. I sometimes make 2 cups at the same time, so to not waste epoxy or not have to make molds. But usually 3/4 of an ounce to put a flood coat on, so the cup will have a, not a very thick coat, but it needs to be fully covered. And then the other 3/4 of an ounce will be divided. I do mix more white than anything else, and you will see why as I start applying it as well, because I do lay in the color and then I do go back through it and lace in white over it. So I do use a little bit more of the whites, both the pigment and the Dreamcatcher. So the reason you don't see a cup here for the white is I'm going to end up using the cup that I mix the epoxy in. So this should be warm enough. So I go ahead and mix this up.
Oh, yeah. I love you. Fast forward this. I believe everybody knows how to mix their epoxy. Make sure I have a flashlight. She's pointing under my door right now. I have found that I really don't get any bubbles when I use my little candle warmer. A lot of people use warm water. I don't want my water anywhere near my epoxy. I'm clumsy, so you'll notice I scoop this out and close my pigments immediately because I will knock them over. Second one.
You will need a torch for this. I have never used a heat gun, so I don't know if that will create the same effect. Let's see. Take one of these. I'm gonna put this on my turner. I'll take you over there. Okay, so like I said, you're gonna cover the cup. You don't want it super thick because you are gonna be adding in some more epoxy as well when you start putting the color on. So you definitely don't want to start out with a heaping layer of epoxy right out the gate. So you will end up with quite a bit left here, and I will use that in mixing with the paint, or the pigment, sorry. I have used a lot of acrylic paint for this technique, 1 or 2 drops in your epoxy, and it strings actually pretty nicely across the cup. Before Dreamcatcher and Blunt, that's what I was using for my white. So if you're in a pinch, or by chance you don't have a pigment in a specific color, sometimes, you know, I'll mix my acrylic colors to make something more custom for my cup, but that's it. You do want to make sure you hit the rim of your cup there. But I mean, I still have a 1/4 of an ounce left. So I'm gonna hit this with a torch. I don't want it too hot when I start putting the color in. This is awkward for me. Sorry, I'm right-handed. I usually pull my glove off first, but you don't want this moving too much once you start putting the colors in. So that's it. And I'm just gonna leave that there. So we're gonna go back over and put the pigments in. Okay, so this is what was left. From putting it on the cup. This is Dreamcatcher. So this is my first time using this, so this might take me just a second to kind of get the desired look I want. That was about 4 drops, and that's pretty perfect. Okay. So it is milky, you know, which is the desired effect here. You definitely want to be able to see that glitter through it. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. So there's the first one. Like I said, I always do more white. So I actually don't need this cup either. Now I'm going to do a little bit in here. That's almost a 1/4 of an ounce. I think black is the color I use the least of. It can overpower a cup unless that's, you know, your desired colors. I definitely have done a few black and white cups where it's a good mixture of half and half, but you know, not a lot of black. So Shook Raven, if you've messed with this at all, you should know you do not need a lot. So I'm not taking a full dropper. This lid gives me some pain sometimes here. I've also learned sometimes if you screw it on really tight and then try to push them off, then it helps sometimes. This is probably more operator error than anything. There we go. Okay. So I actually squeeze it out. You can kind of hear it when it's at the top, but I don't want a lot in there. I don't want to accidentally drop too much in here. 1 drop. That's it. That's all you're going to need. As Nicole has said in many, many videos, this stuff is highly potent. It should last you forever. But that's 1 drop. Okay. Okay, so now I'm just gonna stir these up, lightest to darkest. Okay. Doesn't really matter with these two. I'm not too worried about these, the pink and purple, but okay, there's purple haze. And then some watermelon. Okay. So I'm gonna take this over, reset up the camera so you guys can see the next step. Okay, so I hope this angle will work. I don't have all the fancy phone stands, so I really hope my phone does not fall off this into my wet cup, but that would make for a great video, wouldn't it? So I always start with my white. So this is Dreamcatcher. Got a little fleck of glitter in there. Okay. So I just go typically with the same diagonal that I went with my glitter. And it's very much like Nicole's, but you'll see me hold off and I will touch the cup with my popsicle stick here, tapping it. There's no specific pattern that you need to follow here. There's no right or wrong way to lay this down on a cup. Every single one of them will be different. What I don't want is I don't like too much carry over this direction. So those little tails that you can get from pulling this across, I try to avoid that as much as possible. So I'm gonna set this one aside for a second. Now I'm gonna come in with peyote. And I'm gonna lay a few strings of that in here. If you do get those tails that kind of go this direction, I just use the popsicle stick and I drag them back up. I do overlap the bottom here. Just a smidge of that though. I am less generous with the colors. So this is very similar to how Nicole explains her Milky Way technique. She starts with the heaviest color and then goes down to what she uses the least of. So this is very, very similar to that. And you're just kind of pulling and dragging. Okay. Take some watermelon. You guys like my way of knowing when my husband needs to fix my turner? Super sophisticated over here. That one's pretty thick. So. And I'll typically come back to these colors a few times, so. Now, as I was saying with the black, less is more, people. If you put too much on, you can't take this off. I've definitely screwed up a few cups. All of Nicole's Iconics are the very same way for me. They're very, very pigmented, and they can overpower a cup if you apply too much, especially to one spot. So I do use this dark color as more, you know, trying to create some veining. It's definitely not applied as liberally as everything else, at least right off the bat. Because you can't really get it off once it's there. So you can web some white through it, which you'll see me do here in a second. But there is such a thing as applying too much sometimes. Anybody that started out on the Milky Way without ever using that kind of a technique before, I'm sure learned, just like we all probably did, what too much on a cup can do. So now I'm going to come back. I'm going to leave the black stick there. I'm going to come back with my dream catcher, and I'm going to put that over where I put the color. Okay. I'm going to put it in some of this black. Okay, same thing with peyote. I'm going to run it through some of this color on here. Okay, I'm going to come back with a little bit of purple. This is starting to thicken up, so you'll just want to be cautious or conscious of that as you're taking it out, because you can get a big glob at this point that you might not necessarily be expecting. So at this point, I'm just kind of eyeing where maybe I want a little bit more color. I'm also maybe seeing where I put too much of something that I want to kind of add a little bit more white into and maybe make it a little bit more diluted. Or like where I went heavy with one color, I'm missing some. So like I don't really see a lot of pink in this dark purple here, and I want to add some more here. Okay, and I might add just a smidge more black. And I do just kind of take the popsicle stick and drag it through in spots. Okay, so I'm gonna set those aside for a second. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my heat torch, and I am not going to just hit this whole cup, but I am gonna see areas where maybe I want some movement with a lot, and I'm gonna like hit it pretty liberally in that spot. I'm not gonna hold it there because you don't wanna scorch your epoxy, but you wanna give it just enough heat that it moves a little bit in certain certain spots, but not necessarily the whole cup. So as this turns, you'll start to see it move like here. It starts to bleed a little bit and spread out. And so I still kind of follow the same diagonal line when I heat it, as to not get a lot of movement in my epoxy on either side. So like this is moving pretty good. Like what I don't like on my cups are just like straight streaks of color. It's just not my desired look for my cups. I'm definitely going for a little bit of a blend, but I don't want it completely milkied out either. So I might have to zoom in when this is done so I can show you how this starts to kind of feather. And if there's any spots that start to bother you, like I'm not really digging the bottom so much, I'll hit it with a little heat to get a little movement. You still have plenty of epoxy over here, so if you want to add a touch of something, you can still do that. So like, I'm gonna add a little bit of color right here. Okay. And I probably mess with this for, 10 or 15 minutes after I'm done putting it on the cup. That's about as much work time as you want to have with it, because it will start to get pretty tacky after that. And I'm just kind of doing little bursts with my torch. I'm not holding it wide open. I really like what's happening here with some of the pink that I know you're not going to be able to see right now on the camera, but it's really faint veining. I might add just a little bit more color to the bottom. This is getting pretty thick. When it gets thick like that, if you want to add some really fine veins, you can lightly touch your popsicle stick like this and just pull and drag it. It leaves pretty faint lines. But I'm kind of liking how this is looking so far. So I might just leave it there. Okay, so it will change a little bit over about the next hour, just a little bit of movement. For the most part, it will stay like this. There might just be a few sections that you hit with the gun that take a little bit longer to get tacky and stop moving, but let me take this down without dropping it. For the most part, see, those are those really faint pink lines. That's what you end up with in the end. I typically decal my cups on the diagonal. I have had customers ask for the name to go vertically down the cup. I do feel like it kind of takes away from the design a little bit since everything is on a diagonal. But that is my take on a Milky Way slash marble slash glitter swirl. It's kind of a mixture of all. So I hope this helps some of you. Like I said, I get more requests for how I do cups like this than anything else. Second to this, it's probably full cup water slide. Heather did a really great tutorial on how she applies full cup water slide. So if you are interested in that, I suggest you go check out hers, because there really isn't any other way to do it. It's pretty straightforward. So hope that helps, and hope everyone has a great night.